All right, so a little bit of a backstory here. So in about 6 months ago, Kent and Reed and I and some of our team members met to begin this process and begin collecting data about the division and just taking a look at your entire school community and sort of coming forward. So in this planning process, we met with your school community leadership. We've met with a lot of your principals, a lot of your key stakeholders throughout the community, council members, important community members in terms of in terms of their roles in the communities, pastors, and that sort of thing. We've examined the building inventory, we've looked at your capacities, we've looked at your utilization, and a lot of that was done based on the report that you received about a year ago, a large facilities report that was done for your community. And that's going to be a part of our report in terms of a summation of that, but it's also going to be part of the information that we share here tonight with you, so you can see each of your buildings and see how those numbers came out for you. We are in the process, we have reviewed and we are in the process of reviewing school and program enrollments. We've kind of looked at some of the changes in the past year and looked at some of the initiatives that have taken place since that last facility study was gone into consideration. We determined master plan drivers, and I'll talk more about the master plan drivers here on the next slide. We're doing community engagement, that's what this is all about, and gathering community inputs. We're going to be assessing programmatic needs, everything from early childhood to alternative school in terms of housing, because if you have a program, it has to have square footage. If you're going to have interventionists in your building and tutoring, they have to have square footage. If you're going to have school psychologists and social workers and counselors, they have to have square footage. And so they have to have a place to be. And it can't always be the hallway or the stair corridor or the steps to the stage. We've seen that before. The school psychologist in one district had a little table set up on the steps to the stage because it was a good quiet place for them. And then we are going to develop recommendations. It's our intent to come back to the community with kind of a draft in June to kind of share just kind of an overview, and then we'll be back on August 8th, I believe, to share that information in a joint school board council meeting at that time. And it's not going to be 37 things. We can't do 37 things well. Okay, there might be 37 things in the report in general, but we're going to try to focus on 3 to 5 things that'll move the ball forward to get us down the field and kind of make progress for all the kids in the school community. So let me jump forward here. Master plan driver. So we talked about master plan. What is it that's going to kind of drive what we talk about? What is it that we're going to focus on as we move into the report and we develop our recommendations? So a key to us is providing this equitable programmatic and support service opportunity to the highest degree possible. Some, facilities can limit in terms of space, in terms of square footage, the things that you can do. But to the highest degree possible, how can we provide this? Optimization of occupancy and staffing. We all know that there are staffing issues in education. There's staffing issues in your transportation. They have 18 openings. There's staffing issues at Starbucks and everywhere else you go. McDonald's, you got to order at a kiosk now because they can't put anybody at the counter, which I'm just a little bitter about. So, all right, so optimization of both occupancy of buildings, and we're going to talk about occupancy and utilization here in a moment, and then staffing. And we're going to talk about schools with the greatest needs based on educational suitability and physical condition. Now, educational suitability is kind of the functionality of a building. Can it meet the needs? Can it somehow or another meet the needs of 21st century learning? And does it meet the needs of the current students? And can it meet the needs of the future students going forward? And what is the plan for that if it doesn't? And then physical condition, facility conditions. It's just, how are the buildings? Do the roofs leak? Are the windows drafty? Are the floors in need of replacement? That building envelope, is it watertight? Then you get into HVAC, and does it heat? Does it cool? Does the plumbing work? If you flush a toilet, does it flush? Those are key things in buildings. And you folks love yourself some old buildings. I mean, so the infrastructure of a building is very important. And how it's been addressed and how it's being addressed. All right, and programmatic needs. Now this is not all encompassing, okay? But I will tell you that CTE, what those of us of a certain age would call vocational education, and vocational education is more far beyond that, into career and technical education, into technical certifications. Some areas have heavy equipment certifications, and these are job-ready skills that are in jobs that are in high need and pay very well directly out of high school, okay? And partnerships on those. The CTE is not just a Lynchburg City Schools item. CTE goes beyond that. It can be in your community colleges. It can be a regional setting. But how do we meet the needs of that? Early childhood education. We've had a lot of conversations about preschool, okay? We've had, to be very honest with you, you can house about 184 kids in your current preschool program. You had roughly 400 applicants. So that means 200 kids, 180 kids are being turned away. My understanding of a conversation that I had today is there's roughly 4,000 preschool kids in your city, and you have roughly 2,000 slots between private school and church and faith-based programs and also your school programs. So there is a need in early childhood education. And I feel like that's generally understood within the division with the folks that I talk to. Alternative education framework. For those of you that are involved with the school, you know that there's Fort Hill and the programs they offer there, and there's the Empowerment Academy, and there's the virtual school, and then there's the, help me, the school at Dunbar. Pride, the Restorative Center. And there's a program for elementary and there's a program for middle. You have a lot of alternative education options. And some of them are very powerful in the things they can provide, okay? But we're going to take a look at those and what can they do, what are they doing, how are they doing, and how can they be better, okay? And then also STEM. Now I love it at Payne they had STEAM. Science, technology, science, engineering. We left the technology. Did I do that? Did I leave technology? I know, but it's supposed to be science, technology, engineering, and math. Nobody corrected me on the T there. All right. So, but at Payne, arts is brought into that fold to kind of bring those things together. And that's very important. STEM very much kind of leans into career CTEs. You get into the high school. It can be its own little track, but it also comes down into upper elementary and makes its way through middle school in terms of coding and all those things that kind of can lead to future success. And then building level programs and initiatives. And that's kind of all encompassing, but things like your violin program at the elementary levels. These programs that are very instructive and very powerful in terms of impacting kids going forward. And unique to given buildings. But as far as a planned driver goes, we know we have to maintain fiscal responsibility. That's just where we are today. What savings can be had? Every operational dollar that you save in your division is a dollar that can be brought back around into instruction in some form or fashion, okay? And we talk a lot about transportation, and I'll jump down real quick. Hiring challenges and student recruitment in terms of bringing folks in and getting them to give LCS a chance and come back to LCS. And we've talked about hiring challenges. Transportation, I want to come back to. It costs about $5 a mile to run a bus down the road, okay? By the time you insure it and you repair it and you put staffing in it and you fuel it up, every bus burns about 9,000 gallons worth of fuel, $9,000 worth of fuel, $8,600 worth of fuel in a given year. So simple, basic savings, 10%. You spend $1 million. You run 1 million miles. No, that's not true. There wasn't 1 million miles in the year. Was it 1 million? It was 1 million miles. It was 1 million miles in terms of the total transportation as you go down the road. Okay, you've got buses going hither, thither, and yon to provide all these services. I don't know how they do it. They have 65 routes and they have 18 bus openings today. So you're double routing, and there's folks getting places late, getting picked up late every day. And that situation, ladies and gentlemen, is not going to get any better. The median age of drivers in your division is over 60 years. You have an 85-year-old bus driver that does a great job. I had an 86-year-old bus driver in my school when I left. So, and that's just the nature of it. It's harder to get a CDL than it was. However, I will tell you that driving a bus is very rewarding. And should you wish to drive a bus, I'm sure that Reed will be able to get with you after this and will allow you to make happen. He shakes his head no. Immediately, he shakes his head no. It is fun. Actually, driving a bus is a lot of fun, seeing the kids every morning. So just a brief overview of your community. This is Lynchburg City. You can see that your population here in 2011 and 2021, you got a little bit of a change, 4%. And I jokingly said, I don't really understand why Lynchburg isn't the capital of Virginia, given your central location in the state. It just seems like a perfect spot to be the capital. Maybe we can get that moved here. And all right, well, maybe not. I don't have that kind of control. And then this is your population by age. If you kind of take a look at this, and there's a lot to read there, so let me just jump over here, because this is a much better representation, okay? And I don't think it's any secret in Lynchburg that you have this, you had kind of a bit of a growth spurt here. You're dealing with college-age students. Not all your college kids, though, track back in terms of population to your community, because many times from a census standpoint, if they're from Iowa and they still are, part of their household there, that their census data will track back to that point. But with your recent developments, downtown situations, some of these folks do choose to stay. If they've gone to Liberty and they've enjoyed the area, they might stay. Here's the thing, though, we kind of know about this age group right now. They're not having a lot of children. There's a declining birth rate nationally. It's not just a Lynchburg situation. And there's also a delayed childbirth momentum. For those of us that have children in that age band, we're still waiting on grandkids, okay? I got my first one after my son and daughter-in-law were over 30. So, and most of us, those of us of a certain age, at that point, we had the kids we were going to have. So I already had 2 babies at that point. Well, technically, my wife had 2 babies. Never mind. All right, we had 2 babies at that point. So we know that childbirth is being delayed in many situations, and for a variety of reasons, okay? So, but what we also know is this, if you notice this from a population standpoint, many of these 15 to 19-year-olds are in your buildings right now. As they matriculate forward, there's not much of a backfill there, okay? There's not much of a backfill into your schools, and so that creates a little bit of a demographic challenge that we're going to talk about this evening. It's not as bad as that looks. All right. So enrollment by grade. So if we just take a look at your enrollment here and you track your way across, again, I'll have a bar graph and a chart for you this in just a second, but you can see how this matriculates going forward. You can kind of see, pre-kindergarten, pre-K is a little different in that you more or less determine your enrollment there, okay? So, and you cap it. So that includes both Hutcherson and I believe it's Paramount that has the other. I'm correct on that, aren't I? With preschool, yeah. And so it's not just Hutcherson. But as you come down forward, you can kind of catch your grade levels as they roll forward. And then here's kind of a projected enrollment projections, okay? So you can see that in 2013, district-wide, division-wide, you're about 8,500 students. At this point, you had a little bit of a rebound, not much, post-COVID coming into here. And then as we see these numbers go down, what you can see is your projected enrollment is projected to decline, okay, over time. Now, I want to stress that your division as a whole, how do I say this? We've seen much, much worse. We have worked with some urban districts that are falling off of a demographic cliff, and they can't take the time to make reasoned and deliberate have reasoned and deliberate conversations in order to make reasoned and deliberate decisions. I applaud your school leadership. I applaud the folks everyone that I've spoken with, because what they're wanting to do is take this opportunity to make a decision that can guide you into the next 5 to 10 years that is well-reasoned as best you can. Look, anytime you make a decision, somebody's going to be on the opposite side of that. But they're able to make decisions going forward that are the best for the entire school community, and try to address these concerns and considerations in a more holistic fashion, so they're not having to make panic decisions. We have some schools and places that we've worked where they're having to make panic decisions, and your school leadership is not, and your community leadership is not having to do that, okay? There's time to make a decision, and so that's why this process comes back in June, comes back in August, and then there can be considered planning going forward for the following school year. So any of our recommendations, I think this is probably important to say, any of our recommendations they're not going to be fully implemented in the coming school year. There will be time for consideration in how that implementation will go forward. Okay. Let me bump forward here. All right, so methodology. We're going to get into your individual schools, and I call this my math nerd page. For those, anybody math teachers? Math? No? All right, well, there we go, sort of. All right, I put this up because really what I want everybody to understand is that there's a lot of consideration that goes in behind making a school demographic decision in terms of projecting enrollment, okay? Because, the methodology is just an estimate of future activity. And if you want to think of this in terms of weather, you watch the weather and the hurricanes coming up the coast, and Al Roker is doing the European model and the American model and some other model for hurricanes. This is the same kind of thing. So the average percentage increase is based on historical averages going forward. Linear regression has these values to create future values and a trend line. So it establishes a trend line. And we chose the straight line model because it is a little more better representation graphically. A cohort survival sounds brutal, but it really is. You had this many first graders this year. How many of them showed up for second grade next year? Okay? And so the survival is kind of an unfortunate term, but that's the mathematical term in terms of their cohort. Student age of population model looks at population data. So that's a lot of census data at the school level, bringing that forward in order to create a marker there. And then all of those things are brought back into a weighted average so that we can make a forecast. Now, I will tell you this. I feel really good about our numbers for 3 years. I feel okay about our numbers for 5 years. I'm not going to pin my hat on a 10-year estimation, just like the weather. When you watch the weather, if they give you a 3-day forecast, you can feel pretty confident that it is not or will rain on Friday. You feel pretty good today on Wednesday. This is Wednesday, right? Wednesday about what your weather looks like on Friday, Saturday. If he's telling you or she's telling you about the weather for a week from Friday, you're not even paying attention, okay? So I feel very good about our 3 to 5 year, and that's kind of the window in which we're making plans. But I will tell you that our 10-year is good for a trend, for a future trend in where you're going to head. And we've kind of, MGT's, I've been with the company about a year now, as he shared, I'm a recovering superintendent. But in my studies of this and going back and looking at our projections for other school districts and school communities, we're pretty good. We're pretty good at this. So, I'm sorry, back up. So these are all your models that we've used and all their different projections, just like the hurricane coming up the coast, okay? And so then this is our historical and projected enrollments, much like we shared in the earlier slide. So as you see, what we're projecting is just this little bit of a tilt downward. Now, it's hard to see, but the upper line is the total enrollment. That center line of the gray is your elementary, your K-5, and this will be K-5. There's pre-K is not in this data, okay? Your red is your 6 to 8, and then your center, it would be blue really, but it's your 9 to 12, the one above the red line, okay? So kind of going forward here, so here's Bedford Hills and Darrington, and you can see as we've talked, at one point in 2013, Bedford Hills had 550. Today, their enrollment's at 379. We're predicting, 370. Again, and it's nothing dramatic. If you take Miller here and you take 10 kids out of it, that doesn't really change the dynamic of Miller, right? You've got a kid here, a kid there, and it doesn't dramatically shift anything. So that's kind of the challenge of the division kind of going forward, because you're not having this wholesale loss of students. You're having a slower decline. Yes, ma'am.
Is this based on current zoning for these projections? Like if the zoning?
Yes, this is based on current enrollment data going forward. So
if the zoning stays exactly the same.
Yes.
What we would expect.
Yes.
But that's up for change as well, right?
Yes, ma'am. All right. So and then, but you're correct. This is based on current boundaries, current geographic footprint. So if those things change, obviously the enrollment would change for a given building, and that is part of the discussion and part of what you'll see in the polling data as well. All right, so Heritage Elementary, 490 at one point. You know, they've kind of held their own there at 482 now. As you track that out 3 years later, 467, 462. Lincoln, 479 at one point, 414 today. Again, maybe a 10 student loss next year based on demographic information and modeling going forward. Paul Monroe has kind of had a different ride there. They're at 374. They're actually up a bit. And so that's kind of how you lead to this prediction where they're going to have a kind of a slower decline going forward. We don't anticipate they'll have that kind of volatility. However, you don't know based on enrollment, based on programs, and that sort of thing. Paramount Elementary, you can see they're 339 this year. You know, they're down 40 from last year, or a little under 40. We're estimating 331 next year. They kind of hold their own until they, you know, as you see, as it rides out to 2032 at 308. R.S. Payne, 464 today, carries forward. As you can see, just maybe a 10 student loss, 2 student loss as they move forward. Sandusky, 357 as of day, had been 431 in 2013, and you can see as it just kind of holds its own in the 340s as it slides out into the 330s going forward. Sheffield, similar story, 453 carrying forward. T.C. Miller, 208, current enrollment as of count day, I guess, September, October, when this information was shared with us. And so, and this is our information going forward. And then Bass Elementary, 178 today, had 313 back in 2013, and you can kind of see where they're headed in terms of their numbers. Middle schools, we've got Dunbar Middle School. Dunbar's changes a little bit based on what happens with the innovation school, so there can be a little bit of change and fluctuation there. But 530 today, and given what's taken place, you know, they're kind of riding along that line as they carry forward to 510 at 2027. Lincoln Middle School, similar story, 586, 579 in 2 years, 572. You know, not enough that moves the needle very much, but still kind of a trend downward. And then heading to the high schools, did I miss Sandusky? Did we lose Sandusky? Oh, that's weird. All right, well, Sandusky Middle School, 568 over to 567, and again, in that same vein of losing a few students every year. I don't know how it got behind our high schools. It wasn't that way last night. All right, and then your two high schools here, EC Glass and Heritage High School. EC Glass runs about 300 kids more, 250 kids more than Heritage, and it kind of follows that line going forward, where Glass kind of stays in the 1300s as it trends downward. Again, not very dramatic if you look at terms of the entire building. And then I apologize. There is Sandusky Middle. So again, I put this chart back up because basically what you saw in every building was not a wholesale loss of students in any given building, but a little bit of a loss in every building. I mean, we don't have any buildings right now where we're forecasting any rise in students. Now, things can change. We wouldn't have foreseen if we're having this conversation in 2019, we wouldn't have foreseen what would have taken place in spring of 2020. And there can always be shifts in terms of enrollment. The challenge with your city is that your city is an historic city, and as a result, most of the ground has been built upon. So there's not a spot, there's not acreage in your city, in your division for a new 50-home subdivision, okay? There are places where additional housing will be built and it's planned for in certain areas, but wholesale changes in population and wholesale changes in housing are not likely. Now you will begin to see in some of your older neighborhoods, you know, my school system where I'm from suffers from the same issue, the same exact issue, this little bit of decline, because people like me moved there. We built a house, we raised our kids, I still live there. And I'm not producing children to occupy the schools. And so, you know, a lot of your students, a lot of your former students, their parents still live here because they love the area. So there's a challenge there. You will begin to see some turnover in homes, and you'll be able to see that coming forward, but it's not enough to backfill what's going on demographically in terms of declining birth rates and delayed childbirth. So again, it's not this, but it is just this. And so again, it gives an opportunity for a deliberate thought process going forward. So let's take any questions on that. And I know none of that information is shocking to you. But I think it's important. I think it's also important to note that, you know, you look at those enrollments and there really isn't a place to take an entire building and park them somewhere else. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in utilizations here in this part of the situation. All right, so facilities overview. Now this was a synopsis of the school building information reported to Lynchburg City Schools about a year ago. This information was brought forward to you. And one of the reasons that we were brought on was to take a look at this, kind of take a second view of that. I've walked every single building in the division in order to kind of look at this and reinforcement and just to kind of, with my eye, does it kind of match up? They did a nice job, and it's a very, very thorough product. It is so thorough that it needed a synopsis so that so you can kind of digest it. And so that's what I'm hoping to provide for you this evening. All right? We talked about capacity and utilization, and that is just the numbers of students a facility can handle and still be functional, okay? And that varies by building. So if you're in an elementary building and you've got, I'll make up a number, you got 4 rooms. You got an elementary building and you want 18 kids a room. So, you know, that's 36, that's 72, thank you. Kids, that's the capacity of that building. But kids don't come in chunks of 18, and so you're likely to have 65 kids in that building because your classes don't match up perfectly. But if that's a middle school, you can have 25 kids in a room. So now that capacity is 100. If it's a high school and you think you can have, I'll make up a number, 30, that's too many. So suddenly now you got 120 kids in terms of capacity. But here's also what we know about capacity and utilization. Some classes are never going to have that number. A calculus class or an AP chemistry or a special ed class are never going to have those kinds of numbers in terms of capacity. So it also is dependent upon what kind of programs you have in your building, okay? So if you are the division's magnet for autism, let's say, and you have, you might have 4 kids in a room based on IEPs and based on staffing availability, okay? So a lot of things depend on capacities. You know, an art room in an elementary school doesn't count in capacity because it is not a space that would be occupied on a regular basis as in a homeroom. But in a high school it would be because it would be one of the 7 periods within the block. So those are the kind of determinations that come into capacity and come into utilization. And so you can say that a building will hold 100 kids, but its functional capacity is really 80 given the student enrollment and given they don't come in perfect 25 kid blocks. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And then educational suitability, we talked about just how well does it work, how well does it, the learning environment of a given facility, and that can vary from building, and there is a little bit of subjectivity to that. I'm not going to lie to you. But it's just, well, how well does the building function in terms of its ability to provide education? And then building condition. That one's the most straightforward, okay? When you're talking about a facility, you're talking about the roof, you're talking about the lighting. You know, I would tell you just in first glance at this building in terms of facilities, if I'm walking through here and I don't know anything about it, I would tell you need to upgrade to LED lighting because there's a monumental savings of cost of operation and future maintenance. Now, there's an upfront cost to that, so you have to build that into your capital projects plan. All right? So, those, just as I want to know the age of the roof, because here's what we know about a roof. What do we know about a 25-year-old roof?
Leak.
Well, if it doesn't leak today, it's going to leak because, yeah. Well, let's just be clear. It only leaks when it rains.
Yeah.
Okay, so now don't be jumping on a flat roof. Most of your large commercial buildings are a flat roof, and they're engineered to be thus. But then you have to make sure there's maintenance on the roof drains. You got to make sure that all of your flashing and all that stuff is in play. Is it a modified bitumen or a rolled white, or what kind of roof is it, and what it's. But what we know is that a 25-year-old roof is at the end of its functional life, and there has to be a plan to replace it. So that impacts your facility score. If your windows are single pane from the 1950s, we know that they don't stay up, they don't stay down, and they all leak. And they probably leak not only air, but rain, if it rains sideways. So those are expensive. Your roofs, your HVAC are the things that kind of carry the biggest weight, because replacing a chiller can be a six-figure replacement. Many of your boilers will last much longer, but there are extreme efficiencies if you convert to, because we've all seen the old fuel oil boilers, and we probably have seen a few that were converted coal to fuel oil that take up about half this space. But if you get a brand new natural gas boiler, it is the size of a 350 Chevy engine, for those of you that are mechanically inclined, and it fills up, it's the size of these three chairs together and not much wider, and it's far more efficient. But there's an enormous cost to that single. It's about a $50,000 replacement cost. So for those units. So that's kind of the facility story. And the biggest issue about facilities is it has to be ongoing. There has to be a plan. Hope is not a plan. So you have to have a plan going forward to make sure that you are planning to replace those systems as they begin to age out. There's always a crisis, as this building knows. There's always a crisis of mechanical in terms of certain things. You can't forecast a frozen pipe in generality. There's always things that come up in a building, especially older buildings. All right, so Lynchburg City Schools, here's what we know. We have 2 schools that are under 70% utilized, okay? And we'll talk more about that. Here's something that I'm not sure what we can do anything about, but you got 4 schools under 225 students, and that's largely a functionality of the space itself. This building can't hold much more than that, but we'll talk about that. Suitability scores range from 66 to 95. I've seen far worse. And then your facility conditions range from 60 to 97, and a lot of those 60s, we'll talk about those 60s too as we move forward. This is the sun picture there is from the Lincoln production at the middle school of The Lion King, which I heard was terrific. Anyway, and that's the Payne Auditorium up there. Capacity and utilization, you can kind of see how these numbers break out. I'm going to speed up just a little bit here so you can get to the chart. But you can see how the numbers work, and you have 2 of them below 70. A lot of your schools are in that orange, which is just kind of that approaching inefficient use. And we'll see how this is going to play out for you. And then I have these arrows because the colors for orange and yellow and capacity are a little bit different as you get in forward. You just kind of note the number when we get over there. Educational suitability is much like, these are just like grades. All these scores are intended to be on a 100-point scale so that you can kind of, we all have that A, B, C, D mentality going forward. And you can see how that works out. Below 60 is unsatisfactory. A blue is excellent. And then building condition, same basic situation, 60 through 90. Notice how the orange and yellow are stacked up a little differently there. All right, overall high schools. You see glass. Now this is where our functionality of capacities come in. And don't shoot the messenger when you see your capacities. These are the capacities that were put in as part of the facility plan from last year. They are based on the LCS model in terms of class size reduction. So that's factored into this as well in terms of those grant opportunities through the state. So that's where these functional capacities come from. So your current enrollment at Glass, you can see, is 1325. Functional capacity is 1,700. Original construction is 1955, but you can see the efficiency rate, and it's just straight math, a division of these numbers, 78 and 73 for heritage, and so you've got 76% efficiency rate. The buildings themselves, I really was impressed with glass and the efforts that's been made. That's kind of a testament to what you can do with an older building and an older facility that's had a little bit more of a plan. The fact that school is that age and it's in the green is a testament to the work of some hard work of some folks. Of course, you would expect that with heritage in terms of the blue being one of the newest facilities, in fact, the newest facility, isn't it, in the division. And so look, this 76 is not terrible, but as you see, there is some capacity within those facilities. All right. Middle schools, again, you're looking at a very similar. Dunbar is 1940 original construction of what buildings that are there that remain. Efficiency rate of 70, 77, and 87 for Sandusky Middle School. Suitability scores a little different. You would expect that out of Sandusky being the second newest facility in the division. And again, your suitability scores, that 79 is largely due to what's going on at Dunbar. Dunbar, if you've not been in Dunbar to walk the halls and see how the configuration of the building, I mean, the suitability score is kind of just based on the feng shui of getting through or lack thereof. I love the gym at Dunbar. I thought that was the auditorium there is very neat. I like the cafeteria. It's kind of one of those old style underneath cafeterias. And the cafeteria there is, and especially the kitchen, I noted was in pretty great shape for the age of the facility. There's been a concerted effort there to make it as nice as it could be. So again, you can see your efficiency scores there. Now, this is the one that everybody's probably here for. All right. So you can see now Hutcherson doesn't really count in terms of efficiency. It does and it doesn't. It tells you that they're putting as many kids in there as they can in terms of the preschool program. But that is a determinant of the division trying to get as many kids as they can into that program. Suitability is a 69 there. And if you've been there, it's just kind of an odd layout coming around the back, but a beautiful grounds in terms of out back, in terms of Hutcherson and where it is. A little bit difficult to get into in terms of the access by road and parking. So, and those are the things that actually, the accessibility and parking and those things are also things that impact suitability. So suitability is not just the inside of the building, it's sort of the functionality of the location, the parking, and a lot of those things. And then your facility score is there. As you scan down through there, you'll see Bass is at 71%. They're set their functional capacity at 250. I know they've had 300 at some point. Bass was I thought, in really nice shape for an older building. And that's kind of a testament to what you see there for that score. Bedford Hills, 69%, 81 suitability. And so as you look down through there, you know, efficiency rate, Heritage is the only, is at 97. It's the highest of that group. And you make your way down. Lincoln, T.C. Miller, 208. They're saying the functional capacity here is 276. Are there any questions as you glance at this screen? Well, here's your challenge, okay? And this is kind of the point I was making earlier. You look at your current enrollments. You know, the smallest school you have on that screen is Darrington at 162. There's no place to take 162 kids and say, all right, here we go. I mean, Monica and I worked here recently with a school district that had building utilizations at 30%. Okay, and so there were harder decisions. There were more obvious decisions to be made there, but they had waited so long to make them, then they got to 30% because they didn't have school leadership that was willing to stand up and ask some hard questions and also then have to produce some hard answers. Okay, so back to your point though earlier. So you've got your overall utilization, as you see in your efficiency rate, is 82, 74, and 76. I'm sorry, it's 82%. Forget those other two for now. So it's not that everything is so completely out of whack that you're not getting good use of your spaces. But I will tell you, one of the things I talked about on there was you had 4 schools below 200. It costs just as much operationally to run this 200-kid building as it would to run Bedford at 500 because of secretarial, custodial, the amount of maintenance that needs to be done. You're going to have a principal. You're going to have leadership. So those underpinning operational costs, no, it's not exactly the same. Yes, it's a little bit more to run Bedford. But as a percentage, it costs just as much to operate and maintain this facility as it does to run a Bedford or a Heritage. Yes, ma'am.
And then to me, looking at the facility score is maybe more important when you combine it with the efficiency rate.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you look at some things, the facility is low, but their efficiency is great, so they're making it work even in a less than perfect facility. Whereas if the facility score is in that orange, in the D range,
right,
and then it just
you have to.
How much money are we going to put into fixing a building when its efficiency rate is in the 60s?
Well, I will. There's a different. I will tell you this, that the different calculation is okay. If you're going to take a look, and part of the conversation is neighborhood schools. Yeah. Do we take a look at, because we've talked about transportation and the cost of running a bus. You know, there's easily $750,000 to $1 million in savings in buses with just small tweaks to routes, okay, in terms of those things. So the challenge is you got to look at, you look at Bedford Hills, you look at the number of students there, you look at its facility score, and you look at suitability score. So it has capacity. It's already a larger facility. So what do you do in terms of creating a little bit more volume for that student in that building to increase its utilization? Because what we know is we're not forecasting any growth. So what you also have to look at is you're looking at a Sandusky at 62 on the facility assessment score. And so what does it take? We know what the facilities report had to say on this in terms of that building. What does it take? Is that the building you look at in terms of facilities and go, okay, there's a different decision about Sandusky at 62 than there is at Bass at 74.
Well, and at Darrington, which is a school for innovation with applicants, so I'm sure you've got in there somewhere how many kids at Darrington are zoned for Darrington, as opposed to how many are applicants.
True. Yes.
That's a little. It's same with TC Mello, but
and same with Dunbar. There are considerations that have to be. That's why this is, as I said the other night, this is chess, not checkers. So if you're dealing, and we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So when we're looking at the programs within your division and we're looking at the facilities within your division, those are programs, these are facilities. Where can we house these things? Where can we drive efficiencies that bring dollars back into the classroom? Where can we drive efficiencies that lower our maintenance costs so that operationally we can be more efficient, Because not only is there a challenge in hiring teachers and assistants and bus drivers, there's a real challenge in hiring tradesmen to work in your maintenance departments that can do the skills that are needed to maintain your facilities. And there is something, I know you can say, oh, we can try and contract this out and contract that out. Here's what I know about maintenance. There's some institutional knowledge that is very important when it comes to maintenance. Because when they show up at Miller and they know that the boys' restroom on the first floor is not flushing, they know if they go down in the basement, they walk over to the corner, they take a rubber mallet and they thump it 3 times, that the pressure will return. And we got to fix that eventually, but they know where the rubber mallet needs to be applied in order to make that system work. Or what the repair was last time to know what should be looked at into the future. So there's something to be said for institutional knowledge and knowing your buildings, knowing your bus routes, all of those things, as well as the classroom teachers. So here we are in elementaries, and any more questions on this screen, because I want to get into the poll so we can answer some more questions here. So here's just a breakdown. This is all of it in one chart, okay? Your high school, you can kind of see, again, we have been places where that screen bleeds red in a number of categories. So I would applaud your division, applaud your leadership, applaud your school leadership and your teachers and everybody for making it work for what you have. I know it's not any consolation to say I've seen far worse, but I've seen far worse. So the good news is you again get to make these considered decisions going forward as to how you want to address these concerns. Kind of back to, I would tell you, I didn't finish my conversation on elementaries. What I can tell you is that I was the principal of an elementary building designed for 600. And I know you're looking at this screen, whoo, 600. That was its capacity, its functional capacity. We were at about 525, 530 on a given day. That was a sweet spot. You got 4 sections of each grade. As a principal, I still knew all the parents. I still knew all the kids. I still knew, but you could have full-time music. You could have full-time art. I could have a full-time behavior specialist. I could have full-time LD resources, 2 full-time LD resources and assistants to go along with that. I wasn't sharing staff with another facility. Now, if you get much bigger than that, when you touch up into that 650, 700 range, then you've got the opposite problem. You got to have 1.5 of somebody in order to give art, 1.5 of somebody to give music, and your IEP load goes a little higher. So I would tell you that from a functionality period, we at MGT talk about 400 to 700 in elementary. I would tell you that as a former elementary principal, that a 600 capacity building in that 550 range, because you can have a 5-section room of some grade, but most of your grades are 4, and maybe you have a 3, and that allows for a flow, and that allows for fluctuation of population. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to raise, there's one thing that I feel like this is all really helpful and clarifying, but there's a ton of research on the size of school and how it interacts with the type of students that are there.
Sure.
My understanding of that research is that they say around 500 is an optimal
Yep.
school size for advantaged kids, but for disadvantaged and marginalized kids, kids who are poor, kids who are more at risk, then you want to look at around 200 to 300. And I don't see anywhere where that is taken into consideration. This is not just a money question. So where is that captured? What metric is capturing how well is this school size serving these students? Seems like it's not in there.
It is and it isn't, because I would tell you that I understand that research. I've seen it.
There's a lot of it.
There is a lot of it. But as a principal, having lived it, in terms of, and also as a central office person, in terms of providing those services and providing all of those resources for those same students, it's just very hard to run a 200-kid building. It's very expensive to run a 200-kid building. And at some point, I hate to be this way, but at some point it does become about dollars. It does become about how can we support not just those students, but all students across the school community and the school division in terms of being able to provide equitable services, not just in those buildings, but in other buildings.
Now, I love, to be clear, I love the idea that you're talking about having full-time music and full-time art, but I want to just bring into the fact that we're not talking about, and a really, really important piece is different kids and how they're being served. So if we throw around equity, but we're not talking about the research that shows that smaller schools serve poor kids better, then it's a really big missing piece.
I don't want to dispute.
Do you not believe the research?
I don't wholly believe all of
well,
that
then
research.
but is anyone on the team considering the research?
We have, yes, there is no doubt. We have a team, and we have
We're not
folks.
just trying to get everything up to 500, because we know that doesn't serve all students best. We know that. And you're arguing maybe it does. So everyone just be aware that that's what we're doing, right?
Well, what we're providing for you tonight is an opportunity to give us that feedback.
Absolutely.
Because I would tell you this, your division is not building 500 kid elementaries in the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So our charge for this process is to figure out what it is we're going to use with the facilities that we have. So we have X number of space, we have X number of people, we have X number of buildings. We are looking at preschool, we're looking at alt ed, we're looking at perhaps neighborhood schools. So in all of that conversation very, very important, but we're also looking at what we're looking at in this situation is the facilities we have. Because at this point, we're not building a bunch of new schools. So I don't disagree with your research necessarily. It's not a key component of, it is important to this process, but it's not a key component of this process because the conversation, no, it's about using the facilities that you have. Yes, ma'am.
Just coming from the perspective of the buildings we have, I'm a parent of students here at TC Miller and have been for several years.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're at 208 or so, and I know that there's many who, well, we won't get into the enrollment piece of it with the pandemic and whatnot, but when one of the things you said earlier was we can walk and chew gum at the same time, which really stuck out to me, because when I'm looking at all the numbers and how this is how the facility works, numbers are very helpful. I'm agreeing with Sarah in that, and that this lays it out very clearly. But the program piece, as a parent, is what is the
Sure.
priority for me. What services are provided for my children? One of my children is in speech. One, especially from the pandemic era, has some reading struggles, and so looking at what is provided here in a school of 208, I would, in terms of is money the priority or is our students' education the priority? I would hope that we are really focusing on balancing that out and focusing on chewing gum and walking.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the money savings obviously is important because we need to pay our teachers, we need to pay our bus drivers. Buildings are expensive to run, but on the other hand, the education that my kids are receiving here in this very tight-knit school is a reason that it's a school of innovation. So
Sure.
we threw our name in the lottery for it. And I think that there's just something to be said for finding that balance of programs that are offered and that tighter-knit community is an important thing that just doesn't show in the numbers. Like
No, it doesn't. But I will tell you that we have had, to your point, we have talked with a number of folks. We've got some more discussions this evening. We've got more discussion with the community folks tomorrow. And there will be more, I'm sure that as we move forward, there will be additional conversations. The importance of these schools to their communities, the importance of these schools to given neighborhoods has been a large part of our conversation. And it is probably the thread that runs through LCS. So that's not in a number. You can't, that's not anything you can measure. You can't measure the value of a small school in that interaction, in that relationship. But all of education, let me back up on that though. The best of education is about powerful connections and relationships. You know, the one thing that will change the life of a student is a powerful educator, a strong educator, and the relationship that takes the place of that. There's all kinds of research that supports that, okay? And, you know, smallish class sizes helps, smaller buildings help. All of those relationships help. The point of this evening and the point of these community engagement sessions is to get these ideas and to get these inputs so that as we come back, because our recommendations are going to be fairly broad. You know, look at this, expand this, begin to address this, but we'll help with the implementation as it moves forward. But once we have kind of these 3 to 5 things, because, you know, well, I said we can walk and chew gum at the same time, we can't do 10 things. You know, and there's certain things that we're going to talk about. You know, if the community comes back and says, yes, we very much are in favor of more of a neighborhood school approach, well then, if you're in monopoly, that's go. That's where you have to start, because then we come back to the utilizations. We come back to what size schools do we have. We come back to where can programs fit based on the new utilizations and capacities. The capacities aren't going to change, but the utilizations of those facilities. So the short answer to your question is yes.
That is the balance.
Yeah, it has to be. And I will tell you that all of the people that I've spoken to, now my primary contacts have been Kent and Reed, but all of the leadership, both on the community side of things and on the school leadership side of things, they're very much aware of that, and that is front and center in their considerations.
That's great.
But you can't ignore the numbers. I mean, the data is the data, and so we know that we're here a little bit, so we have to think about that. We know that we're here, so we have to begin to think about that, because we have to have watertight envelopes. We have to have facilities that meet the needs of learners. And so, again, that is the process. That's why we're here tonight.